Wow, I don't ever talk about this stuff on any other podcast. I have to say, he's a geeky.
I love this. I'm curious about this flow state and turning it on and off. Like when we get older, does that become harder for us to turn it on and off?
Actually, easier. So, a couple things to know here, high level, before we actually answer your question. One, the old idea about flow, and I mean old, probably. I don't think anybody's thought it was true since the 70s or 80s, but it hasn't really formally. I think Rise of Superman is the first time somebody said it out loud in my book. Flow is not a binary. It's not a light switch. You're not in the zone or out of the zone. It's a 4-stage process. So to put this in more colorful terms, about once a month, somebody comes to me and they're like, dude, you got to study me. I'm in flow all the time, dude. Study me. And in the beginning, like, I'm mostly an introvert. I don't really love people. And if you're in my face telling me I should study you, like, you're creeping me out as is. And in the beginning, I used to just like try to extricate myself as fast as possible. And now, like, it's happened so much. I think it's a public service. And so I tell the truth. And I'm like, we have a word for that. We call that schizophrenia. Right? You don't get to live in a flow state. It's bad. That much dopamine pumping into your system, that's schizophrenia. That's not, like, you don't want to be there for a lot of other reasons. So it's not a binary. It's a cycle. And some of the stages in the cycle, the first and the last, the 4-stage process, first and the last are totally unflowing. Like, the first stage is defined as struggle. It's miserable. You literally, the onset work we're doing on flow, this is not 100% accurate. This may not be accurate for everybody. More and more, it looks like you actually have to trigger the fight response just for a second, but literally the fight response. So you have to be like that worked up and that much of it. Like, it only has to last an instant, but it's that lean in instinct, that real surge of aggression, that moment of attack mode that may, even if you are like playing with your dog and getting into flow that way, to actually snap in, it may take like a moment where the wrestling gets serious or whatever. Like, we don't know, but that more and more it's looking like that. And so the struggle phase, it can stretch on forever, but even if it's brief, it's always going to be unpleasant. And there's a recovery phase on the back end of a flow state. Flow is neurologically very expensive for the brain to produce. And it burns up a lot of energy. And there's a dark, I got to go dark on the back end of it. And that's also because flow burns out a lot of feel-good neurochemistry, shows up during the state. And some of those chemicals take a little while to replenish, right? People who do drugs, they talk, if you do MDMA, 3 days later, you have the serotonin blues, right? It's because you depleted all your serotonin. Same thing happens with cocaine and dopamine, blah, blah, blah. Well, flow, we have, all those drugs do is release endogenous internal chemicals in our brain. We can burn those up just in the same way with drugs, and flow will do that. Right. So you have to recover on the back end of the flow state. So it's sort of that. To answer your question, like, how do we flip it on and off, and does it go away more as we get older? So flow states have triggers. These are preconditions that lead to more flow. There are 22 that have been identified. There's probably way more, but there's 22 we know of. We're starting to think we understand how they work neurobiologically. We know they all drive focus into the present moment. Flow only shows up when all of your attention is right here, right now. So it seems like there's 3 neurobiological ways to do that. You either push dopamine into the system, norepinephrine into the system. Neurochemicals are generally multi-tools. They do lots of different shit, but this dopamine, norepinephrine, that's anxiety, it is anxiety, but it's also attention and focus and excitement, right? You mix those 2 chemicals together, that's romantic love. So if you've ever fallen in love, think about how much you can't stop paying attention to the person you're falling in love with. That's dopamine and norepinephrine. So flow triggers tend to kick those neurochemicals into your system, or they lower cognitive load. All the crap you're trying to think about at any one time. If I lower cognitive load, I liberate more energy that you can use to pay attention to the present moment. And you do, your brain will spend it that way. It's a general rule. So it seems like what we know so far, flow triggers do those things. There may be some very special flow triggers that work off the visual system. Can't stop paying attention to the person you're falling in love with. That's dopamine and norepinephrine. effort.